We are seeing at the federal level a lot more funding being proposed specifically for transit than we've ever seen in the history of the federal transit program. So that's encouraging to me. I'm hopeful that, along with that, there are proposals by the administration and others to create new grant programs that really can address racial inequities, including improving service and hopefully operating assistance for transit so that it can better serve low-income communities. We still have most of our low-income communities in this country have transit service. At best, it's hourly service, which is really not going to get anyone reliably to a job that they need to be at. And so much more investment is needed in transit. And I'm curious, Laura, CTA, like LA Metro, has really been struggling with its budget and its revenues, especially in the light of COVID. And I know even during this moment, that's very hard for the transit agency. And I'm curious if there's been some strategy or messaging that you've been finding has helped to resonate to make those budget cases, even for a transit agency that's feeling the pinch in its budget right now. I think that would be really useful if there are any insights you've gleaned to help us in Chicago and beyond.
We're investing $160 billion into a ton of new rail lines. I would be remiss to not mention that we're not doing the similar investment in the bus system, which we need to be doing. And so as all this fancy new rail is rolling out, we're losing transit ridership. We have very significant drops in transit ridership. And so the case that we're making at ACT LA is like, we can have a city that is transit oriented. We can have a city that is truly supporting transit ridership and supporting families, but we have to do the development different. I mean, we really we have a massive housing crisis here. It's impacting every facet of the city, including the transit system, and we need every agency, and we need all hands on deck here. One of the really exciting parts of our work right now is we have a Metro as a Sanctuary campaign that we started with our members a few years ago, which our goal is to cut the police contracts that Metro has. So Metro spends about $800 million, almost $1 billion, over 5 years on contracts with the Los Angeles Police Department, the Long Beach Police Department, and the LA Sheriff's Department. And these contracts keep growing over time. And what we've seen is continued concern about safety on the system. They're ineffective. And we've seen a lot of riders, particularly people of color on the system, youth of color, be very uncomfortable with the presence of police officers on the system. And so while Metro's big line is this is our strategy for creating safety, what we've seen is this actually makes a lot of riders feel unsafe. And it's not an effective safety strategy. And our goal is to get these contracts reinvested, so divest from the contracts and invest that money, that $800 million, into real safety programs. And so we put out a report called Metro as a Sanctuary. It's up on ACT LA's website. And we basically listed out what we think would be a start for real safety strategies. And those include things like new programs, so a new transit ambassador program to actually staff the stations and have wayfinding and help with navigating the system. Things like elevator attendants. We want a complete overhaul of how Metro approaches homelessness on the system. So we're calling for real services, resources, outreach workers that are trained. When we look at what's going on here with our housing crisis and the data that we've seen about what's being built versus not, I mean, we just had our housing element. We're in the middle of our housing element right now, and looking at what was built during the last cycle, it's like we're way above moderate goals. We've not reached any of the targets on affordable housing. This is the city with the worst overcrowding, the worst homelessness crisis, the worst rent burden in the country.
One of the things that I think has gained the most traction the most recently is ETOD has almost become synonymous with affordable housing, in part because of the affordable housing crises happening in almost every part of the country. And so looking at how transit agencies can be a partner in addressing that and making commitments to meeting affordable housing goals in their joint development policies. So I look back on a lot of the work we were doing, which was really to make the case that there was a market for housing near transit. And, we were calling out the need, the crisis that we saw kind of emerging around a lot of low-income housing tax credit projects across the country near transit that were at risk of expiring and being lost, and really encouraging communities to do something to preserve those. But I think overall, a lot of our early TOD work, which still dominates a lot of the TOD narrative, is around this market for housing, and it's really focused on new development and new people coming in, and a white gaze of, if we can get the more affluent white people to move in, that's somehow going to save our cities and our communities, versus saying people are living in these communities now, and there are things that are not working in their communities. There's lack of job access and job opportunities. There's safety issues. There's a whole host of things that we need to be improving and investing in our communities. And I feel encouraged by ETOD efforts that are really pushing against that narrative and saying, we need to look at a full range of housing choice options.
We need to move beyond the inclusionary conversation. We need to be talking about a lot bigger investment in 100% affordable, and particularly and permanently affordable. And these conversations about community control. So yeah, we're trying to just push the city to think a lot more aggressively about affordability and deep affordability. Really looking at this holistically, ETOD, or equitable transit-oriented development, it requires a just transit system, and it requires housing justice, and really focusing development from here on out on equity, so that we're accounting for the inequitable development of our region up until this point. And so for us, it's to be transit oriented, it requires it to be equitable, because that is actually what building for transit riders means.
Well, I'm excited to watch as things unfold, because I so appreciate the work you and all your partners do to kind of not accept the status quo, keep pushing, and absolutely these issues and ideas emerging around social housing and really much bigger investments that are needed. We just, as a country, have to have a better solution than a tax credit that only provides affordable housing to a small segment of the population for a time-limited period. It's just not a long-term sustainable strategy to meet the growing and very real crises that our communities face in LA and Chicago and beyond. So I think lots of things in the works. We will see what ultimately comes out of it, but it's encouraging to me that, things that even 2 years ago, no one was really seriously questioning tearing down freeways or transit operating assistance. And now there are legitimate conversations happening at the federal level about both of those and many other issues centered around environmental justice and other needs for our communities.